MMA, it is definitely, if we go back to Waldo, if we had had the MMA and/or satellite technology back then, Waldo would not have happened. I'm going to give you an update. We had spoke about this back in November, but we were looking at some software out of California that's been used on and is being used on California fires and up in the Northwest in Washington and Oregon. It's called Zone Haven. We did move forward, and we're working through the contract on that and should have that done like in the close future here. Once it's signed, and it's going to be about an 8 to 10 week implementation. But we're really excited about it because of the capabilities it brings us for both evacuation information, for traffic information, and Chief Niski can speak more to that as well, what it provides to us. But it allows us to take the weather and the fire event and the topography, those type of things, and look and see where we expect that fire to go. And then we can initiate evacuations or pre-evacuations based on that information and give people a heads up and time to get out. It's a very good system. The other really good point about it, it has multiple notification methods. And so what I mean by that is it not only goes through the phone system, the cell or landline system, but it also goes out through social media, so Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It hits your phone whether you're in the system or not, and it also goes through the mass media. And from the people that we talked to out in California, both sheriffs and fire chiefs, they find that they can make that notification. If I'm the incident commander and I call in and say, we need to evacuate zones X and Y, in between about 2.5 minutes to 3 minutes, it's done. Everybody's notified. So it's a very good, we're excited about it. It's going to be a good improvement to our system here.
Yeah, Ms. Hendrum?
Yeah, so Chief Royal, we've heard from quite a few people who are not happy at all about Zone Haven, and I imagine you've heard from those same folks. So it would be really helpful if you could answer some of the questions that they have. For example, it's a relatively new system, I understand. What kind of efficacy studies have been done? What happens when communications go down because of fire? If you could speak to some of those things.
Yeah, so the communications, well, let me back up. It's been used a lot. And the biggest fires here in the last couple of years in California have been using it. And again, we talked to both sheriffs and fire chiefs, and they're very happy with it. And the notification is very good, and the adaptability to it is very good. Two more things on here. So the last one there, you see the battalion chiefs and his commanders. We've indicated and basically dictated that we're going to pull the trigger fast on evacuations. The reason that is you don't want to delay. And now one of the things the group that's been talking about the evacuation modeling has brought up the Paradise Fire in California.
Right.
That was an extreme event. That was a very bad event. 80 plus people died in that. 10 died in evacuation out of that 84. The others, and dozens of them, didn't evacuate, stayed in their homes. Same thing that we've seen in our Colorado fires. And so that's one issue, is not evacuating, and that's why we harp on being educated, being prepared, and being ready to go as soon as an evacuation is needed. The second thing that happened in that fire is that the decision makers were slow to pull the trigger on evacuation. They had about an hour to hour and a half that they should have pulled the trigger on sometime during that time, and they waited until the fire was coming into town. That was the wrong decision. Now, within the fleet modeling, they talk about response times in there. It's not our response times. It's based on hurricanes, but they give you 5, 3 hours, and 1 hour time frames. That's for people to leave their houses. That doesn't work for us. When we call an evacuation, it's minutes. We want people leaving now, not an hour, not 3 hours, not 5 hours. And that's an issue. Zone Haven as well, and OEM's been working this with PD as well, is smaller zones. So back in Waldo, we had bigger zones. We found that smaller zones work better, and you have more flexibility. So, for instance, if you take Garden to Gods to I-25 to the Air Force Academy, that's a huge area. Well, within that area today, there's, and I can't tell you how many, but there's smaller zones. So say there's 10 in there.
Yeah.
Then you don't have to evacuate that whole area. You look at Zone A and Zone B, and you evacuate those areas, and you put C, D, and E on pre-evacuation, which controls the flow and helps the movement out of there.
Right.
And because of the fire itself, it seemed like some of the systems went out. I guess that's a reality any fire.
It is,
Right?
and-
So how does Zone Haven work or address when the fire itself has taken out the ability for people to read their phones?
Yeah,
or their
so the
computers?
reality of that, and we're talking an extreme fire. So Paradise was an extreme fire. They had 70, 80 mile an hour winds. Marshall was a very extreme fire, 110 mile an hour winds. At that point, you do what you can because it doesn't matter what system, it doesn't matter what modeling you would have done, doesn't matter what resources you had in place, that was going to get ahead of you. Every citizen will be able to go in there and look and see their zone on there and see if it's in evacuation or in pre-evac. They'll be able to know their zone. In fact, when we go to that point, we're going to have a whole campaign on Know Your Zone, so that if you hear it on the radio or if you hear it on a text or see it on a text, you know you need to do something.
Is there incompatibilities between Fleet and Zone Haven?
They're two separate programs, so I
asked for, are there incompatibilities between Zone Haven and Fleet?
What I would say is Zone Haven is more tactical, more operational, helps us as responders far more than Fleet does. Fleet will help the individual know how long it's estimated it will take them to get out of their neighborhood. Anybody right now in any neighborhood or any citizen can go to Fleet and do that. And that's where, that's where individual responsibility comes in as well. I know one of the questions that have been brought up is about putting out the roadways to get out of their neighborhoods. And I've said this before as well, is if I live in the neighborhood, if I live in a WUI or if I lived in a hurricane area, I would know personally, I would go out, look at maps, and I'd get my family together and show them how to get out of areas, and more than one. And Fleet is tied to that. Fleet is tied to modeling, getting times that, from point A to point B. Zone Haven is tactical. It still has evacuation flow routes in it and things like that, but it's more operational and tactical.
Okay, well, if Fleet's free and it's not incompatible, then I always suggest everybody use them both, okay, to enhance the effort. But the bigger question, and I want everybody to please address this, all right? We do a lot of land use issues, or a lot of development issues. How is all of this going to help us make decisions on allowing developers to build in the WUI and through the WUI and around the WUI? How is this going to help us, okay, making the smarter decisions and not overwhelming individual roads or anything else? I mean, there's got to be some kind of marker here, and that's what I think we started at. Okay, you got to help us. You got to tell us, okay, we're floundering around trying to figure out at what point in time, is all this evacuation issue and congestion of roads and everything else going to impact the safety of our citizens? And right now, I'm hoping to see it. I didn't see it in this particular presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, and
assertions have been made that we have not updated our evacuation plans in 10 years. Is that true?
no, that's not true.
Anything else, Stephanie?
No. Maybe the rest can elaborate.
That's why when you say to model, and we talk about modeling, I can't model for every variation of an incident that occurs. It's just impossible because you change one little step and it changes the whole operation. I think we are very good, the fire department, OEM, and the police department, to adapting to those changes relatively quickly. We can change our processes. We can change the way we do things at the turn of a dime. We do it very, very quickly because we're used to it. I think, Councilmember Fortune, to kind of answer your question, also about updating and what we've done and how we do it better, experience. I think we've experienced a lot of incidences in Colorado Springs that have made us better. We've learned from the mistakes we've made in the past, and we've improved based on some of the things. We've changed things the way we do things based on how we did them in the past, what we've learned from those incidents, and what we've learned from other incidences. And we do update our evacuation plans very regularly. OEM has done that. If you look at them last year, breaking the city into 79 zones, which Mr. Reed will talk about, that was to help develop a better plan for evacuations. So we're always doing that. I think what you're seeing is the reference to the 2010 maps, that we haven't updated those. That's what you're seeing.
Right.
That wasn't done by the city. That was done in collaboration with the Pikes Peak Area Council of Government. They're the ones that put that together and paid for that. We haven't updated that, but we update our plans. That's number one. Number two, those safety zones change. Again, in a wildfire, we can identify safety zones. You get very, very comfortable that in your area, here's my safety zone. I focus on, that's where I got to go if there's a fire. Now the fire's impacted that safety zone. And we're trying to change your direction now and tell you to go to a different safety zone, but your focus is on that original one. That's why I talk about dynamic. These are very dynamic events. That's why we don't share a whole lot of information. The people we talked to in California, and one of those was CAL FIRE, when we talked about the recommendation to model, they both recommended against it. They both said, don't model evacuation plans. It doesn't work. They're the ones that use Zone Haven, and they say Zone Haven is the way to go because it changes with the dynamics of the event. It's not a pre-modeled evacuation plan. We also, when we were talking to the experts that spoke to you about evacuations, and we asked them about modeling in one of our meetings with them, and we actually specifically asked them, okay, so when you model and something comes up that the model changes, what's your expectation of the individual? And what their response is we just expect police to be out there to give them new direction. It's boots on the ground. It's officers on the street that tell people how to exit their neighborhoods, how to get out, and how to get to a safe area.
Waldo Canyon happened today. What would be different in evacuation?
I don't know if there would be much different right today. I think the one thing we would have the availability, and I know Chief Royal talked about a lot of the technology we have to detect fires. And I know one of the questions was, if there's cloud cover. Well, I think another opportunity that we have now is our drone program. If there's cloud cover, we can actually get a drone in under the clouds to detect fires because we have drones with infrared capability. I think maybe we would have our drones up during the Waldo Canyon fire to give us a better idea of an overall picture of our evacuations. I'm not sure much would have changed, quite honestly.
Chief, I've got one question. I'm on the board for Visit Colorado Springs, our tourists. We get into the tourist season, let's say May to September, when we get lots of visitors. If we should happen to have a wildfire, then how do we notify the tourists where to go, what to do? Is there a system, or have we taken that into accountability?
A lot of the visitors here aren't signed up for our ENS, our emergency notification system, but
They
are not because, well, some of them are. If they're part of Everbridge, I think when you go to a different area that has Everbridge, it will actually notify you. And that's our notification system. So it kind of geo maps the area, and then you get notified when you're in that area, your phone is.
Right. But if you don't have that.
We still notify hotels. We notify restaurants. We notify everybody that's in that area with our ENS system, if they're registered with the system itself.
Yeah. Curious about these drones. That's the first time I've heard that we have drones available. Where are they coming from?
Well, I'm not sure. Will we buy them commercially? We have about 6 to 8 drones right now with different capabilities. We've been using them for about the last 3 to 4 years.
Okay, so the police department has drones.
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, how big is the drone?
I'm not talking military styles drones. I'm talking about kind of commercial drones that you could buy in a store that anybody can go out and purchase. We have several that are cameras. We use them for search and rescue. We use them for searching for suspects. We use them on scenes where we need an overall view of a scene to kind of identify what our reaction to something is going to be.
What are their weather limitations? Those little ones don't even fly after about 15 or 20 miles an hour of wind.
Well, I mean, obviously it would be within the limitations, but when we were talking about cloud cover, if there was no wind, we could get under cloud cover to look for fires, to look for ways to better our evacuation plans to give us an overall picture.
Down to a 3-meter level, back in 2002, we completed an evaluation of our wildland-urban interface on each parcel. So we have over 35,000 addresses in our identified wildland-urban interface. So Councilmember Henjum, you're asking for a map. There's a map. It's out there. And I'm very prideful about all of the communication, all of the networking. So Councilmember Henjum, again, your comments about the number of groups we work with is hugely not only flattering, but impactful, because we do have a say in a large body of the work that's going on nationally.
I wanted to, you referenced 7 people who lost their lives, who chose not to evacuate in some form. I wanted to just clarify that. Were all of those individuals who were able to make the decision for themselves? In other words, not children, not someone who has some impairment or isn't able to act for themselves. Were they all adults who made that decision?
And that is a very good question. I cannot speak at that detail based on those numbers. All we know is the message to evacuate had been received by one form or fashion, because we know from conversation with family members or neighbors that they were aware of that but did not evacuate. So, council member, that's a good question, but I'm not sure. Chief says the understanding is yes.
One just follow-on question in relation to the Marshall fire. I know I think it was a Denver Post article. It's one of the takeaways was, and I think of it for Colorado Springs in our future growth, is the closeness of the structures contributed to the spread of that fire. And as we try to, what's the word?
More density?
Increase density. Do you have a thought about that? And then also that the natural grasses versus a watered, green grass, those natural grasses, I mean, the fire burned right through them, boom, house to house. If you could just comment on those two things as we're trying to be smart with our water, maybe use more natural grasses or local grasses and put buildings closer together, homes closer together.
So as we continue to put combustible items closer together, that without a doubt increases the risk. The code does attempt to regulate what the severity is by certain ratings, like 1-hour ratings of walls. But remember that 1-hour rating is a 1-hour test to a standard fire, which in my lifetime, in my 43 years in the fire service, have never seen a standard fire. Homes create spewing ember generators.
I want to answer Councilmember Henjum's question. Do we have an evacuation plan? Yes, we do. And we've had one for a long time within the city. Currently, that plan is under review and has been for a little while as we look at different after-action reports and how we can make that plan better. I think in Waldo Canyon, we did a mass evac, and some people we probably could have evacuated a little bit later than what we did. We do full-scale exercises, and we just did one recently up north, and we might have had 16 people out of 2,000 that could have participated. It's dismal and it's difficult. But we still continue to do it. We're at community events. We're talking to folks. I talked to someone. I said, "Hey, I'll come to your HOA, and let's talk about this. I'm excited about this." Yeah, you'll be lucky if you get 2 people show up. I mean, that's just kind of the attitude.
So on your first slide that you showed us, as you said, we do have an evacuation plan. I'm a little confused. I went out and looked for Colorado Springs all hazard evacuation plan. Right. It's under review, and this is what I showed you just a minute ago. It looks like a new plan that hasn't been adopted yet. So could you give me a little more, help me connect this document and this plan with the plan that I see on the city website? Well, it's not a plan. It's just that we will have a plan on the city website. I'm just trying to make sense.
Wrap your head around it.
Yeah,
sure.
I'm trying to understand.
So we have a plan in our office that our folks follow. okay, which is going to be different than tactical plan. So that plan helps us understand what they're doing out there, how we can support them. Whether it's getting a hold of dispatch and getting information out through ENN or IPAWS or whatever the case may be, that's our plan. We have a cover plan, which is a general overview. That's tied.
This one.
Yes, that's tied to your emergency operation plan. That goes to who's responsible for what legally, who's responsible to do what. And so those are all tied together. We don't get into tactical at all. We are strictly support. So the plan, the all hazards plan that we're talking about that's under review, that's a tactical plan. That goes to the folks that are out there doing the evacuations. And so that's the difference between the two.
So I'm sorry, this is the higher level and the one, I'm sorry, I did not follow you. I
Sure.
apologize. This is the tactical?
This is the umbrella plan. This is
The umbrella plan, okay.
Maybe that's a little bit easier. It's the umbrella plan. It's the administrative plan, okay? Then there's a tactical plan that goes underneath that. That's what your fire and law enforcement and everybody's following.
Okay, and the date on this is November 2021.
Yes.
But is this a new plan?
As far as the new plan, once we consolidated, yes, I would say 3 years ago when we first put it together, yes. But it's still the same information. It's just under PPR OEM and not city emergency operation.
You didn't address Stonehaven as being part and parcel to your particular process. Again, I'm looking for the connected pieces between all your presentations. It is not a good strategy to blame the public for anything, and I've heard it on numerous occasions. People don't show up, people don't listen. One issue was we can't give them the evac locations or routes, but the first person who spoke said they're going to send out cards to people in the WUI and doing this thing. I see this as an absolute work in progress, in process. You know, we have IT issues. We haven't even bought Stonehaven, and you're lauding its success within our community. We haven't communicated properly to the public yet. And so, again, this looks like a piece of Swiss cheese more than a really coherent plan. Again, probably in your minds, you're happy, you're glad, but the public is a bit confused. Mixed messages get mixed results. And again, going back to what I asked for from day one, and what we were trying to resolve was in land use issues, okay, as we overdevelop, and historically we have, what are the threats to these overdeveloped communities and the transportation requirements and the evacuation routes? What are the metrics we're supposed to use, okay, so we can process informed choices and not leave it to the developer or the whims or whatever you want to call it. Okay, you guys are supposed to be working in lockstep for solution sets. And again, I go back to what on earth is going to happen if something does happen. And I don't have that warm and fuzzy, and I don't think the public has it either. This is all under the purview, okay, of the executive branch. The executive branch needs to get their act together and work out a structural framework that everyone can understand and proceed when asked, okay, and help us make informed decisions. And I don't see it here. Again, I laud your effort. I know the public's concern, but how about moving a little bit faster and closure so that we can get something done for the public's sake? Use Fleet until you have Zone Haven. Use Zone Haven and Fleet together, okay, and everybody work to keep the public informed and tell us where we're supposed to go and what we're supposed to do. And for heaven's sakes, don't build there because it's of greater risk to the rest of the community. And that's all we ask, and I really don't see it. Thank you for your time.
And so when we have a situation, if you have a fire, for example, you can't send out notifications to individuals 3 months in advance and say, here's your evacuation plan. Because 3 months later, we could be doing road construction, we could be doing utility improvements, and those roads are no longer available for evacuation purposes. The key to it is to follow the evacuation orders that are issued by these personnel.
The model allows you to set that response time to various different factors. You can't set it to 0. I think the minimum time was 1 hour in that model. And what that really means is if you set the response time for 1 hour for that last resident or citizen to respond to the call, you could never have an evacuation time that's less than an hour because that one person has to make that, has waited an hour. The endpoints have a big impact on the evacuation time based on the number of endpoints and in the location of the endpoint, because the endpoint is the point where you determine the evacuation time has ended. So when that vehicle or the vehicles reach that evacuation point, their evacuation has ended. Their time. So you have to account for that travel time in the endpoint. So in the models that we ran, we set those evacuation points as close to the evacuation zone, edge of the evacuation zone as possible. The question is it useful in development review? And because that was the question I really was trying to get at. It's like when we're evaluating a project and is adding 800 new people to an area of 30,000 people, how does that impact the evacuation time? And so as you sort of saw in my presentation, a small change in population didn't seem to have a big impact in the total evacuation time. So as a tool in looking at that, it's, I would say there could be some more evaluation in that, but I think as a development review tool, I'm not seeing a lot of usefulness at this point.
Questions. Did you consider the ordinance that was proposed to us by the citizens groups?
This ordinance was based on direction from the mayor, and his direction was that we were looking at changes to Chapter 8, yep. Article 7, which is the public safety, and then into the operation of emergency management piece. So we were looking at evacuation pieces dealing with planning and procedures that are currently existing within the departments and putting some of that language into codification or into city code to making it the law of the city. So it does not consider the piece from the citizen group.
Oh, please continue.
So here you see on the first slide, I basically covered this. We're looking at making changes to Chapter 8, Article 7, Parts 1 and 2. These are the public safety pieces. And in doing that, we're going to expand some of the definitional elements that are in Article 7. We're going to include evacuation, incident command, commander, command system. We'll probably put in there NIMS, a couple other definitional pieces that have been provided by the departments as to what they think would be helpful in city code. Let me just back up for a moment. In the research looking into devising this draft ordinance that we put together, we looked at, and I looked at, across the country for examples of such ordinances within city code. I couldn't find any. So this is cutting edge. This is something that Colorado Springs would be doing that almost no other city that I could locate does here in Colorado, or even nationally. The idea that you're putting in evacuation planning into your code is not something I see across the country. We're going to standardize or codify the fact that, as Mr. Reed pointed out, there's an annual review that goes on the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, on the city's all-hazard plan, evacuation plan. Those are done annually. We're going to put in a city code that a full stakeholder review will be done every 5 years. So again, to make sure that the citizens understand that the city departments that are tasked with these plans, with putting them together and instituting them, know that they have to make these deadlines and they have to meet these obligations on an annual or a 5-year basis. We're going to talk about, and we're going to put into the city code, the fact that there will be evacuation zones. And the language taken here is from the city's current EOP plan, and evacuation zones take in consideration natural topography, existing neighborhoods, major roads, anything else that the EOP plan that's put together by the departments considers when they make these evacuation zones. Should a zone haven come online, we have more information there, that might also go into this piece here as well. I don't want to tie, again, a city code ordinance to a specific software piece because the city could change software vendors. But the ideas behind it, that we're looking at topography, neighborhoods, population, major roads, those are always going to be the same in evacuation zone planning. But the mayor's direction was that he wants the citizens to understand that there are evacuation zones in the city. It's not just we look at the whole city and we pick this neighborhood or that neighborhood. These plans already exist and these zones already exist. They're continually updated and looked at by the departments. But city code will mandate the fact that we actually have evacuation zones. And then finally, the piece that the mayor directed us to look at is the fact that we want the fire marshal and the emergency management director, the PPROEM, to focus on community outreach and community education.
But a citywide plan, like an evacuation plan, is typically not part of an individualized development plan. And the one thing that we need to be careful of, if we were to try a concept like that, is that we don't create ad hoc moratoriums that come in and go out without any notice to people. Moratorium has to be created by ordinance, has to be limited by time. It will probably have to have some exceptions. And you can't have this citywide plan that sometimes stops development and sometimes doesn't. It needs to be more specific and clarified than that. So after that review, we determined as a group that Chapter 8 was the best place to put evacuation planning. It is our emergency planning section, so that's how that decision was made.
And Bill, we certainly can have more discussion about Chapter 7 and whether or not development and building ought to be a part of this whole process.
Yeah, but my concern is that what I'm being told by the city's attorney's office was they were told not to consider it.
Well, I think what they said was what they were told to consider.
Well, that's the same thing by default. We're looking for boundaries. We're looking for again the overall concept of safety of the citizens. And if we consistently, put development in harm's way and everybody else in harm's way, I think it's only fair that we consider all of it. I find it rather disheartening that the mayor would take a position, okay, that might call into question the safety of the citizens, and that's what we were talking about all along. We need to go back and look at it as a council. Thank you.
Is that if we're going to enhance what the city is already doing and the proactive measures that we have undertaken, then Chapter 8 is our public safety chapter. That's the most appropriate chapter for us to encourage and codify what our proactive measures are. When you look at the reason why we had Mr. Frisbee speak to you today is when it comes to traffic engineering, there's uniformity across the United States on how you look at traffic codes, how you look at traffic analysis, how you look at traffic models. What we're discussing today is proactive emergency management measures. And you've heard from the city attorney's representative that this is cutting edge. And so based upon the appropriate advisement and the recommendations, that's why the mayor recommended Chapter 8.
Okay.
And I would add that the mayor recommended—
Mr. Bollinger, go ahead, introduce yourself.
Bollinger, City Attorney's Office. The mayor recommended or requested an amendment to Chapter 8 after the City Attorney's Office advised him that the ordinance belonged in Chapter 8 and not in Chapter 7.
Okay.
I don't want to put the cart before the horse.
Yeah, I understand, and Mr. Murray's made his point about Chapter 7 and building and development, and we're not going to walk away from that, Bill.